Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
California's rugged and scenic northwestern corner is the beginning of the great Pacific Northwest. A region of untamed and primitive beauty.
And the Humboldt County Sheriff's Department has now joined efforts with the Arcata Police.
Growers living off the grid. Humboldt County also has the highest rate of missing person cases in the state. Where 60% of marijuana is grown.
There's a lot of evil here. A lot of evil.
This is Kinda Murdery, and you're entering the Emerald Triangle. Hey everybody, welcome to Kinda Murdery. I'm your host, Zevin Odelberg. Thank you for deciding to be here. As I always share with you at the start of the show, I have cerebral palsy, and I'd like to use Kinda Murdery to create a supportive community for people living with disabilities. So, if you or someone you know is living with a disability and could use friendly hearts and minds with which to share their story, please reach out to the show via email, kindamurdery@gmail.com. Also, if you have a Kinda Murdery story you'd like to hear on the show, again, please reach out via email, kindamurdery@gmail.com. Give me the rundown, and if I use your story, I'll shout you out on the show. And finally, if you like what you hear, then please tell everyone you know about the show, subscribe, and leave a review. Nothing can do more for the show than you when you engage directly. When you spread the word, you're Kinda Murdery's secret superpower. And when you spread the word and leave reviews, it's like an instant power-up that ensures I can keep telling Kinda Murdery stories for as long as you want to hear them. Speaking of Kinda Murdery stories, today I must credit the Red-Headed Black Belt at KymKemp.com. That's KymKemp.com. And an article written by Justin Lefevre on February 22nd of this year for bringing this particular story to my attention. Much of tonight's story is taken directly from Justin's excellent article and matches the facts as I have verified them through an extensive review of primary sourced newspaper articles from around the time of Vera's disappearance and murder. And now I present to you a mystery most foul direct from the dark heart of the Emerald Triangle, a story that's long on suspects and short on convictions. The cold case story of a life savagely concluded, and a mystery tragically still unsolved. A tale of darkness encroaching at the edge of town, and pitch-black murder deep in the wilds of Humboldt County. This is Vanished by Violence, the disappearance of Vera Weitzel. In the 10th month of 1958, we speed towards the close of another year of unbridled optimism in the United States of America. It's a heady, unfocused pastiche like eyes crossed staring out of a rainy car window flying down the highway. Brief, blurry impressions of economic boom. Detroit's churning out gleaming road yachts girded in steel and gaudy with chrome. Elvis and poodle skirts. And pretty girls on roller skates with strawberry milkshakes as though all of America is an impressionist's watercolor of Mel's Diner. The food's delicious, the coffee's hot, the jukebox is rich with Otis Redding tunes, and the diner is open all night. But the watercolor's been rained on now, and the details are reduced to a blur of color, beautiful in its imprecision. And finally, from this heady pre-psychedelic soup of post-war promises, unspoken but loud in the ears of all, our collective lens begins to come into focus, and we find ourselves in the company of a lively woman in the early blush of middle years. You can almost picture her as a pinup girl painted on the side of a P-38 Mustang, at 5'3", and a curvaceous 135 pounds, 35-year-old Vera Weitzel has hazel eyes, dyed blonde hair, a quick, radiant smile, and favors the form-fitting sweaters and dresses that were oh so fashionable in that autumn of 1958. and she's got plenty of va-va-voom. The last known photo of Vera Weitzel was taken in January of '57. She's wearing one of those form-fitting V-neck sweaters and flashing a 1,000-watt smile as she leans over to pet an adorable, bright white Scotty dog. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Never mind the final photos. Back to 1958, when Vera Weitzel is still brimming with vitality, still very much alive. Vera's married, but her husband Ray is a Navy man who more often than not finds himself deployed at sea, and so Vera has been an on-again, off-again resident of the Sunset Room boarding house at 312 D Street in Eureka, California, for the better part of a decade. And she finds that it requires no great amount of moping. Indeed, it's simply factually reporting to conclude that she is often, too often, alone there at the Sunset boarding house in Eureka. And so perhaps to shake off the lonelies, or just to shake a leg and avail herself of that great American therapist, the road, that fall of 1958, Vera traveled from Eureka to Eugene, Oregon, to visit her mother, who last reported seeing her alive on October 11th. Vera was last seen alive by anyone, except her killer, of course, in Hoopa, California, where she'd gone visiting. And she was last seen alive in Hoopa on or around Halloween night in 1958. A day later, her car was found abandoned 6 miles west of Willow Creek. And on November 12, 1958, the Eureka Humboldt Standard would report that local police had put out an APB, an all-points bulletin, seeking any information about the whereabouts of Vera Weitzel. Her husband Ray, a Navy man, was deployed at sea when the article was published. Less than 2 weeks after her disappearance, local law enforcement was seriously considering the possibility that Vera Weitzel had been murdered. A homicidal explanation for her disappearance took on the tragic weight of extreme likelihood when 2 days after her published disappearance, bloodhounds failed to find even a trace of her scent in the Hoopa or Willow Creek area where she'd last been seen alive. Humboldt authorities became convinced that foul play was afoot and Vera may well have been killed. They informed nearby Trinity and Shasta counties to be on the lookout for the missing woman. Barely 2 months after her official disappearance, the hopeless bloodhounds would prove prescient when on January 12, 1959, Vera's bones were found at the bottom of a ravine 5 miles outside of Blue Lake, California. Vera was last seen accompanied by a logger leaving Eureka for the Hoopa Willow Creek area several days before her abandoned car was discovered outside of Willow Creek. In addition, days before the abandoned car was found, a suitcase belonging to the missing woman was uncovered some 11 miles from the car. It had been rifled through, but Vera's purse and car keys were still inside. When asked if the authorities would continue searching for Vera in the area where she was last seen, Deputy Harvey Larson, in charge of the investigation, said, "Well, there's a lot of brush up there." He intimated that a special investigator with a lie detector would soon be arriving from Sacramento. Sheriff's deputies combed through Vera's room at the Sunset boarding house at 312 D Street in Eureka, looking for fingerprints that could eventually be used to identify her if or when she was found. The special investigators arrived from Sacramento, and several of Vera's friends were interrogated. It was intimated that some, if not all of them, would be given a lie detector test. Weitzel was reportedly known to frequent local taverns, rooming houses, and motels, leading to an extensive search and inquiry by law enforcement. Meanwhile, a strange consistency was emerging in the testimony of Vera Weitzel's friends. There seemed to be a general consensus that Vera Weitzel, quote, looked 10 years older than her age. This piece of information, combined with the 4 different men she had been seen out with in the days preceding her death, and the many local bars, rooming houses, and cheap motels that Vera was known to frequent, began to paint a picture of a woman living rough, who may have been employed, or at the very least moonlighting, at the world's oldest profession. 6 days after Vera Weitzel's disappearance was first announced to the public, law enforcement was actively investigating the crime as a murder spawned by the jealousy of a lover. That same day, on November 18, 1958, Chief Criminal Deputy William Peterson told the Eureka Humboldt Standard that one person was in custody, not necessarily, he said, under arrest, and that another, and possibly a third, would also be brought in for questioning. One of these men reportedly had called on the missing woman at her apartment on Eureka's D Street and had found the other man there. The man police had in custody was the one last to be seen with Vera on the day she disappeared in the Hoopa area on October 29th. Both the Eureka Police and the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office did not believe Weitzel would be found alive, but they still declined to make an official statement to that effect. All evidence in the case would be handed over to the visiting special agent from Sacramento for study prior to conducting the lie detector tests. When Deputy Larson was asked if the two men who were in custody were regarded as suspects, he said, quote, "Not exactly yes, and not exactly no." On November 19, 1958, the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office told the Eureka Humboldt Standard that the special agents from Sacramento would likely take 2 or 3 days before they were fully informed and oriented on all aspects of the case. For a second time, these special agents traveled to specific locations in the Berry Summit Redwood Creek area where Weitzel's car and other effects were found. Investigators noticed that a mileage check from the car's last lubrication date indicated the car had somehow traveled some 30 unaccounted for miles between the time when Weitzel was last seen in Hoopa on October 29th and the following day when it was discovered. Investigators were sure that the car had not returned to Eureka and were actively checking out a spot near Berry Summit where a car had hit an embankment. Clay, similar to the area around this embankment, had been found on Weitzel's vehicle, which investigators said comparison of the two may indicate the direction of travel during the unaccounted for mileage. The Eureka Humboldt Standard revealed on November 21, 1958, that the 3 suspects law enforcement had identified were tentatively cleared of suspicion after passing a lie detector test. Chief Criminal Deputy William Peterson said the findings were not yet final. And here I would just interject that for many, many years now, lie detector results have not been admissible in court because they're considered unreliable. They can be fooled by people familiar with ways to elicit bodily pain responses. They can be fooled by pathological liars and sociopaths. Granted, the latter are rare, but much more common, of course, amongst the ranks of dastardly murderers. So the fact that multiple suspects were dismissed from suspicion based on lie detector findings is troubling, to say the least, especially in light of Vera's case being a cold one where no murderer was ever caught, tried, or convicted. That same morning, when Chief Criminal Deputy William Peterson tentatively cleared the 3 subjects based on lie detector findings, 2 special agents from Sacramento, accompanied by Deputy Sheriff Harvey Larson, traveled to Redding to question a 4th man who had been seen in the area where Weitzel was last seen around the time she disappeared. This man was being held by authorities in Redding on misdemeanor charges. Approximately 3 weeks after Weitzel had gone missing, her husband Ray was en route to the United States. He was reported at the time to be 1,500 miles at sea when he was contacted. A few short days later, on November 22, 1958, somewhere between 30 and 60 volunteers from the Preston State Honor Camp on Lord Ellis Summit, the Humboldt County Prison Farm in McKinleyville, and volunteers from the Sheriff's Marine Posse gathered to search the entire route from Blue Lake to Hoopa. That day, Deputy Gene Cox was chasing down a lead that proved false after a friend of Weitzel's reported she was in Klamath Falls, Oregon, in the county jail. The logger Weitzel had been seen with after leaving Eureka on October 29, 1958, had been, quote, like the other men, tentatively cleared. On the 25th of November, the Eureka Humboldt Standard got word that the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office was considering employing skin divers in their search for Weitzel after an anonymous tip encouraged deputies to check a, quote, certain area of the Trinity River for the missing woman. The location on the river was described as a deep eddy at the Blue Slide on the Hoopa Indian Reservation. The water in the area was swift, icy cold, and extremely hazardous for divers. And Deputy Charles Fernicus and President of the Sheriff's Marine Posse, Leonard Lamoureux, took a boat with an outboard motor to the spot to assess the area's conditions. That day, Humboldt County Sheriff Albert A. Nichols made it clear that Weitzel's fate was still unknown, saying, "If we haven't got a body, well, then we haven't got a murder." While investigators explored the lead on the Trinity River, Deputy Sheriff Harvey Larson and Eureka Police Sergeant Gordon Busey were returning to Humboldt County after aiding agents and specialists of the Bureau of Criminal Investigation in assembling and analyzing evidence to date. A brief article published on November 27, 1958, entitled Hunt for Vera Weitzel Slows, said that the collaboration with Sacramento's Bureau of Criminal Investigation had not shed any further light on Weitzel's fate. Just one day later, Weitzel's husband Ray arrived in Humboldt County after departing his role as petty officer on the USS Princeton. They briefed him on his wife's circumstances and questioned him at length, hoping to understand where his wife might have gone and with whom. Investigators also learned from their work in Sacramento that stains located in the back of Weitzel's car were, quote, definitely human blood. But it was not clear if they belonged to Weitzel. Despite this piece of physical evidence, Sheriff Nichols told the Eureka Humboldt Standard that the case was a blind alley and that he was hoping for a break. In the first week of December, a posse of more than 60 people made up of National Guardsmen, sheriff's officers, and other volunteers searched the rugged terrain in what was considered the last major hunt unless new leads develop. But the posse delivered no results. On January 12, 1959, 2 months to the day since the Eureka Humboldt Standard had originally announced the APB looking for Vera Weitzel, Sheriff Albert A. Nicholas announced that Weitzel was murdered after 2 hunters found her skeletal remains in a deep ravine 8 miles east of Blue Lake. The bones were at the bottom of a 12-foot straight drop at the end of a 40-foot incline, hidden by rocks and logs, and a few feet away from a dirty road leading onto Highway 299. Authorities believe that her body had been rolled into that ravine from the main highway. An analysis by 3 physicians identified the remains as those of Weitzel using a silver pin known to be in her left ankle bone. With, quote, little flesh remaining on the skeleton, analysis of the bones indicated that there were several head wounds, one on either side above the ear and one in the back. On January 14, 1959, the Eureka Humboldt Standard reported that the sheriff's office had imposed a, quote, almost total censorship on the development of the Vera Weitzel murder case. This included orders that deputies could not be quoted and the deputies assigned to the case would remain unnamed. Instead, Sheriff Nichols said he would provide a daily news release, and that morning's release contained a cryptic 15-word note describing a conference with the district attorney and the development of 2 new leads in the case. The paper learned later that law enforcement and personnel from the district attorney's office discussed 2 people not previously identified with the case. Just 1 day later, after the deputies' newly established wall of silence, deputies took Carl August Soderlund into custody, a 48-year-old Hoopa man who was the reported logger last seen with the murdered woman. Soderlund had told detectives that Weitzel had driven away from Hoopa around midnight on October 29th. Another aspect of the case was revealed. Weitzel's clothing was not found near where she was found. Law enforcement thought the location of those missing clothes could provide more information about a possible suspect. Soderlund was transported to a Willow Creek courtroom to stand trial for a previous drunk driving charge. He was actively being held in the county jail on a vagrancy charge, but not formally charged with Vera Weitzel's murder. At this point, 3 separate branches of law enforcement, the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office, the Eureka Police Department, and the Special Investigations Unit out of Sacramento, were all working to put together the jigsaw puzzle pieces of Weitzel's disappearance and murder, a crime which was now 2.5 months old. Special Agent Ray Stonehouse of the Bureau of Criminal Investigation in Sacramento was working with local officers on what he called a, quote, mighty tough case. Deputy Sheriff Harvey Larson and Eureka Police Sergeant Gordon Busey were working hard to weed out facts from false reports. And Larson said, "We haven't run out of leads in the case yet." 2 important clues that might go towards solving Weitzel's murder were announced on January 22nd. The sheriff's office stated that 2 blankets stenciled with the name of the murdered Vera Weitzel's husband may be linked to the slayer. The blankets were believed to have been in Weitzel's vehicle when she disappeared. One was described as a white navy blanket stenciled with her husband's name, Ray Weitzel, and his serial number, 714-5587, on all 4 corners. The other blanket was a marine blanket with a U.S. in the center, a stencil of Weitzel on one corner, and it was clearly chewed by a dog. Equally important, the sheriff's office said, was locating the clothing Weitzel was thought to be wearing at the time of her disappearance. Gray slacks, red underpants, a gray jacket, a yellow or pink sweater, and a pair of black sandals. An electric toaster, an electric frying pan, and a Dutch oven were thought to be in her car when she disappeared, and all were unaccounted for. Investigators were also looking to locate the, quote, safety glass missing from the left front door. There were only 2 or 3 inches of the bottom of the glass remaining in the vehicle, and investigators thought that the location of the glass may lead to the exact murder scene. The coroner, W. Lloyd Wallace, said Weitzel's body may have been transported to the area where the skeletal remains were found. If it had not been transported, Wallace said it was likely that the remains would have been scattered. Investigators had also learned that Weitzel was in a fight with another woman at 312 D Street in Eureka 3 days before she disappeared. The fight led to her being struck in the head with a wine bottle. However, the coroner made it clear that the severe head wounds indicated by the condition of Weitzel's skull could not possibly be the result of a wine bottle attack. Almost 1.5 years after the Eureka Humboldt Standard originally announced the disappearance of Vera Weitzel, on June 3, 1960, a 33-year-old mill worker was placed under arrest for passing bad checks, and he quickly became a possible suspect in Vera's murder. His name was William Claude Turk. Deputy Gene Cox and Deputy Larson had driven to Chico to pick up Turk after he'd been arrested on the bad check warrant while he was swimming at a Butte County public swimming pool. Deputy Larson said that Turk is, quote, only a possible suspect. We've checked out dozens of leads like this before. It's just a routine investigation as far as we're concerned. In contrast, District Attorney Leonard M. Conry said Turk is, quote, definitely a suspect, and the DA notified the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office that he would be entering the case. Authorities in Chico had actually located a clue in Turk's car long sought after by investigators, a blanket, but Humboldt County investigators examined the blanket and determined that it was not one of those stolen from Vera's vehicle. However, investigators also located a smudge of green paint on Turk's car that resembled the color of Weitzel's vehicle. Turk, a possible suspect or definitely a suspect, depending on whether you asked the sheriff's office or the DA, had reportedly told officers in Chico that he had reported his car stolen the very night of Mrs. Weitzel's disappearance, but the sheriff's office had no such record. Reports in the paper referred to severe wounds on Weitzel's skull. The woman's skeleton had a hole in the skull fitting the peen end of a ball peen hammer and was found in a ravine off of Highway 299 north of Blue Lake several months after she vanished. The article also provided information about the state of Weitzel's vehicle that differed slightly from earlier reporting, describing its windshield on the driver's side as scattered, and Weitzel's suitcase and purse as reportedly found a mile apart. The following day, it was reported that work was still underway to give Turk a lie detector test which would either, quote, clear him or hang him. Again, commenting on the side here, in a murder investigation of a poor, brutally slaughtered young woman, it doesn't seem to me appropriate to be giving so much weight to the results of a lie detector test. Still in jail in Humboldt County, deputies had yet to question Turk because they were busy checking out various aspects of the case that may or may not involve him. Deputy Harvey Larson had flown to Sacramento the day before with a sampling of green paint from a car formerly owned by Turk to have the Bureau of Criminal Investigation compare it to the paint found on Weitzel's car. Around the time Weitzel vanished, William Claude Turk was living near Bull Creek in southern Humboldt, but had specifically been away from the area Friday and Saturday, the same time frame in which Weitzel was slain. It was reported that when Turk returned to Bull Creek, his vehicle's windshield and both the driver and passenger windows were smashed from the inside out, as though a terrific struggle had taken place. Deputy Cox said that several other incidents appeared to link Turk to the slaying, but he described the leads as thin. At this point, Weitzel's case again apparently goes cold. There is no mention of it until the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office released their list of cold cases in 2021. It has now been 64 years since Vera Weitzel, the wife of a Navy man, left her boarding house in Eureka and disappeared. Several months later, she was found bludgeoned to death at the bottom of a ravine east of Blue Lake. Despite law enforcement's identification of multiple suspects, Weitzel's murderer was never brought to justice. In light of everything, it begs belief that William Claude Turk was not investigated further or even charged. I guess he must have passed that damn lie detector test. To this day, the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office asks that if anyone has information to share about unsolved crimes, they should contact the crime tip line at 707-268-2539 or submit information using the online crime tip form or email HSOTIPLINE, that's Humboldt Sheriff's Office tip line, HSOTIPLINE at co.humboldt.ca.us. Please be sure to reference the case number associated with the case when reporting information. If you're calling about Vera Weitzel, that number is 195-806-326. That's 195-806-326. It may be that 64 years later, too much time has passed to solve the murder of poor Vera Weitzel, but maybe not. If someone out there knows something, please reach out. Again, the crime tip number is 707-268-2539, and the email is hsotipline at co.humboldt.ca.us. Perhaps someone out there knows something that can overcome the gross misuse of lie detectors in determining innocence. If you've enjoyed today's show, please remember to subscribe, leave a review, and tell your friends. It really makes a world of difference. And the next person to leave a review will get a grateful mention on the show. Join us again this Thursday for a different kind of murdery insomniac. You know, the 1970s are known for lots of crazy things. You've got Studio 54, wild cocaine parties. You've got streaking and Watergate. What some people consider to be the golden age of pornography on film. Elvis Presley passed away. There was a lot of polyester and bell-bottoms. All kinds of wild stuff. But did you know that the 1970s were also salad days for Sasquatch? Some might even call them his coming out party. That's right. Join us this coming Thursday to find out why, in the 1970s, the only thing bigger than Clint Eastwood was Bigfoot. So join us on Thursday for Kinda Murdery Insomniac stories to stay awake by. Click follow or subscribe on Kinda Murdery right now so you don't have to worry about missing out on Bigfoot in the 1970s. That's right, BF in the age of the Bee Gees. And somebody call the Hendersons, because things are gonna get very hairy. I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery.
Kinda Murdery, The Emerald Triangle is created, researched, edited, produced, and hosted by Zevin Odelberg, with opening theme by Niall Madden and art by the Gin of Lang. Available now on all podcasting platforms. If you like the show, please subscribe, review, and tell your friends. You can find us on social media at Kinda Murdery or email at kindamurdery@gmail.com.